is the Pegasus Podcast, presented by Night Sports Now. UCF news, views, and a few hot takes. Now, here are your hosts, Bailey Go Knights Adams and Christian Charge On Simmons.
Welcome into episode 247. Be sure you're following us on Twitter at BaileyJAdams22, at ByCASimmons, at Night Sports Now, and at Pegasus Podcast. You can also email us at PegasusPodcastByKSN@gmail.com. We're live again on the Sons of UCF YouTube channel. We made it back for another one. Didn't say anything problematic last time, I don't think, other than the whole thing about Frost is not coming back. You guys are crazy. Scott Frost is back. We did our emergency episode. Go listen to that when you get a chance. We did an emergency episode on Saturday, and it's been a whirlwind since. So we'll have a lot to get through. A ton of things. We got 4 topics on the Pega Uniform Podcast. That doesn't really roll off the tongue there, Brian. I don't know.
I think that might be our new name, to be totally honest.
I hate it. This is my last episode. We're gone and done. We'll start with the big reunion of the day, and a former quarterback reuniting with his old coach.
Tommy Castellanos headed to Florida State to link up with Gus Malzahn, the biggest quarterback coach reunion of the day. That news is so seismic, we figured, why even talk about UCF? Why not just be a Knowles podcast and break down how that shocking reunion happened? But I think there might have been another one today as well, another quarterback coming home.
He's home.
I wish I had Bailey. If you're audio version, Bailey.
Oh yeah, if you're this is bad if you're on audio. I just stopped talking and then held up a number 10 jersey. This is exciting. Mackenzie Milton is back as Scott Frost's new quarterback's coach. I think it was a move that everyone saw coming once the Frost thing happened. And I think it became even more evident when they handed Scott Frost a number 10 jersey at his press conference. And he said, 10's not my number, but I think I know someone who could use it.
Very subtle.
Very, very subtle. And then I told you, I was like, he's talking about Dylan Risk. I don't know why everyone's going crazy, but Christian, thoughts? This is cool.
I feel like I'm living... if you're one of those weird conspiracy people who believes that all of life is a simulation, UCF's been making a good case for it the last few days, because this is weird that this is real life. I just can't. And I think just how quickly things escalated is part of what's so odd to me. 2 weeks ago, we were sitting here doing pods about, we're stuck with Gus Malzahn. They probably can't get rid of him. What are they going to do? The team's 4-8. This is the most apathetic the fan base has been since 2015 easily. And 2 weeks later, it's Scott Frost is the head coach. Everyone is amped as hell. Mackenzie Milton is back as the quarterback's coach. There's a selfie of Mackenzie Milton, Shaquem Griffin, and Scott Frost in a Lance logo shirt, just hanging out in the UCF facility. This, I seriously think more than anything it's just the escalation of it is messing with my brain. This happens so fast.
Yeah, and I think just having, I don't know, just it feels like, it does feel like kind of a bit of a dream. We will see how this all plays out. Obviously, it could go completely wrong. But right now, we talked about it last week, or not last week. We talked about it. It feels like last week because it's been that long, and just how much has happened. But the emergency episode on Saturday, we were just like, this could go wrong. But right now, it's just the vibes. The vibes are, there was not a coach who you could have hired that would have restored the vibes this quickly and this intensely as Scott Frost has. Obviously, he has plenty of work to do, and we'll talk about that later on in the show. But I think this was one of those moves that everyone saw it coming, but just kind of to get to that point where it happened, and you have those photos, you have the video of Shaquem getting out of the car and Scott Frost and Mackenzie Milton walking out of the facility, and Shaquem's reaction being, of course, very wholesome. It does. It feels very weird to kind of be in this spot where this is reality. And I do I hope, I think everybody at this point, every UCF fan would know. I don't really know what the national reaction to this has been so far, but I think it's one of those things that's important to point out. This isn't just he's UCF's former quarterback and now he's the quarterback's coach. He's been on Josh Heupel's staff as an analyst. He's working his way up the coaching ranks, and that was something he always wanted to do. That was something he said, when he got injured, he always wanted to get into coaching, and for it to come full circle and him be back and continuing that path at UCF, I love that. I think it was somebody had retweeted the tweet. His mom back in 2021 had tweeted something because they said, hope Mackenzie still loves UCF as much as we love him. And she said, he will be back there coaching one day. And he's back.
Crazy how all it took was his former head coach being shockingly hired to the job. And
Yeah.
I just got to say, Brian Peterson and Lonely Bumblebee are begging me to turn this into a uniform podcast because they're just messaging about uniforms.
They're trying to tank our podcast. This is bad.
Or improve it in dramatic ways. It's hard to say, but yeah, and what you said is a key point to me because this is, I don't know. I think that, I don't know. I'm not here to be negative about hiring Milton because I think it's awesome. I think there is something, what I honestly think is very cool, to be honest, is that and maybe it's suicidal, we'll find out, is that UCF was in such a bad spot in 2015, just fan base wise, on the field wise. And this season was not as bad as 2015. Let's be clear about that. They were competitive throughout most of the season. Most of the games didn't go their way, but this was absolutely the worst season for the fan base since 2015, probably in my lifetime, the second worst one behind 2015. And it's so fascinating to me that the same faces that arrived to pull them out of 2015 are here now. Like, that's just so interesting to me that almost a decade later, it's Frost and Milton again, here to try to save the day. And what you said about Milton's coaching experiences, it is true, let's be clear, nostalgia is playing a bit of a role here for Milton because this is kind of a bump in the coaching track. He's going from an offensive analyst to a positions coach at a Power 4 school. That is not the usual trajectory. There's usually some more stops in between, but I'm not feeling overly freaked out about that for a couple reasons. The first is that Milton's coaching career is almost a little longer than, it looks in his record, or whatever you want to call it, because when he was at UCF and he was hurt, he very much was acting as a GA those last 2 seasons. That was where the idea of him being a coach first came from, was his last 2 seasons at UCF. He really worked in that role. And the second thing is, we can talk about, we've had conversations philosophically on the podcast before. Is the goal of a positions coach to coach up the players or is it to recruit? And I think the honest answer is it's in the middle, and we'll see how Milton does on the coaching up the players part. But is there a better recruiting pitch for a quarterback than your positions coach is a school legend, probably the best player in school history, at bare minimum, the most important player in school history, who is beloved and popular and had immediate success, for him to sit down and say, I want you to be the next me, and I'm going to take you on that journey and coach you into being that? It's a powerful recruiting pitch if you're a quarterback. I
can't think of a much better one. And I think there's a lot to that. And I think there's a lot to even his ability to, I think some of it depends on, I guess, the coach itself. But McKenzie obviously has been there and done that at the college level. So that's going to help him in coaching up quarterbacks too. Like that just, he does have that experience of, obviously he's done kind of what you said was similar to a GA role when he was at UCF. He's done the offensive analyst thing at Tennessee, but when he's coaching up these quarterbacks in the quarterback room, like, he can read it. He knows how to read a defense. He knows how to do all this stuff. And a lot of this is going to be coming from experience at this program. And I think that's very cool itself. And it's Brian Peterson says RJ Harvey fans are going crazy over Christian referring to KZ as the most important UCF player ever. I don't want to get into that. I don't want to, you and I talked, do we even talk about that on the podcast? It might have been an off podcast.
No, the RJ Harvey best player in program history fans have me in such a freaking box because they did an amazing thing. They said an insane statement that you can only contradict by being mean to RJ Harvey. None of us want to do. So we just have to let
people, man.
So I'm going to treat it the way you always do with that stuff. I'm going to let it stand for exactly a year until it's okay to be mean to RJ Harvey, and then I'll explain why that's not true. He's a top 5 player in program history, but either way, shout out to Mackenzie Milton, the undisputed best player in program history, except for maybe Dante Culpepper and possibly Blake Bortles and maybe Shaquem Griffin. But
yeah, no, it's cool to see them all back, and I know the content has already been great.
What? Oh, the content is phenomenal. UCF, unsurprisingly, has done an excellent job rolling this stuff out. This is like fan service on top of fan service. And honestly, I feel like a dumb child because I just keep going on social media and just like smiling like an idiot at random social media posts. Like the video that I think they posted on their Instagram, or I think I just saw it on Twitter because Eric DeSalva posted it, of Shaquem getting there and running up and hugging Milton, and Frost just looking like a proud father, like smiling at them. It's bad because they do have to like go win games, but it's like they've just brought back all the 2017 nostalgia, and I'm really, really feeling it. And we get to pretend for 8 months that it's going to work. So I'm just going to keep staying in that bubble as long as I can.
So that's where this is really helping me, is that, we're in December. Normally, and every year before this, we're talking about UCF's bowl game coming up. And with the bowl streak being over, we don't have that, which sucks, but we do have this. And it's like a distraction. It's like, hey, look at this. Look, we're not playing in a bowl game, but like, look at all this great stuff. And I'm enjoying it. I'm eating it up.
I'm in a better mood right now than I think I was at any point during the season. Like, I'm so excited for the rest of the off season. And TCU, now we'll see. I will say there was a little bit of like delirious joy, you and I, after that TCU game, because just, I don't know, it did kind of wear off quickly when we were trying to just walk in any direction and find an Uber, but
No, that was the only real in-season joy that I felt, other than I guess some of the Arizona game and just RJ Harvey doing stuff. But this is the vibes within the last week have completely turned around, and we do have 8 months to enjoy.
Can I ask a philosophical question that's going to piss off everyone listening?
I guess if you have to.
Let's do it. Because what are we here for if not to kill our own audience?
Not literally
Mackenzie, kill. No. Kill you listening. Key clarification. Mackenzie Milton is quarterback's coach. Mm-hmm. That's been announced. That presumably means that we will be saying goodbye to other UCF alum quarterback's coach Darren Hinshaw from the staff, since that was his role here. I know he was listed as an offensive coordinator, so was the entire offensive staff. He was the quarterback's coach. Let me ask you this question right now. Do you believe that Mackenzie Milton is an upgrade over Darren Hinshaw at quarterback's coach?
I don't know. I don't think that there's enough to say yes. I think that's actually I hate that you asked that question. Now you're putting me in the same spot that all of the people are when they're saying the RJ Harvey stuff. Like, I think Darren Hinshaw did a really, really good job with the quarterbacks over the last 2 years. And I know that sounds crazy to say because the quarterback position has been very much talked about and it's been a disaster at times, but I don't think any of that's been his fault. Like, I think John Rice Plumlee came in and took a giant leap from 22 to 23 with Hinshaw, under his direction. And then by the end of this season, and we saw the fourth string quarterback coming out and winning UCF a game and playing well enough to win some other games. So I think Darren Hinshaw did a great job. And I think if Gus had stayed, I think he would have been scapegoated himself, which would have sucked. And I would have been mad about that. But I can't be like, oh man, Mackenzie Milton's coming back. Like, I love it. That's great.
I know. And that's why I felt like such a loser even posing that question, but to me, it's a philosophical thing of, I know, believe me, but you know who isn't? Mackenzie Milton, UCF's new quarterback's coach. I'm totally cool with them bringing Milton. I don't want anyone to take a soundbite away of this saying, wow, yeah, Christian hates that they brought in, the most beloved player in program history to be a part of the staff. It's great. I'm excited for it. I think that, FAU 2018, one of the best blackouts in UCF history, probably only top of the 2022 blackout this year. Excellent one. Milton had 6 touchdowns that game. I like how I loaded in these photos and I'm getting distracted by the photos. But the bigger point from the Milton thing of Milton versus Hinshaw is where I'm really thrilled that Frost brought in Milton. I also think as far as nostalgia hires, this is where it stops, because I do think they really need to be careful about towing the line here. I do not want to see Frost just go reassemble the 2017 staff. And the reason is that the sport's very different. UCF is very different. No one can tell me with a straight face that staff is the best staff for UCF right now. They need to be trying to get the best guys they can, guys who know this era at as many spots as they can. The thing about Milton is he does know this era. He's been at Tennessee as this is all going on. He's seen how it's done at an SEC program. So I'm fine with that, but I'm cool with this one. The point is, if we are seeing more valuable position coach spots going to guys who have just were with Frost the last time, that's where I'm going to get a little uneasy of, okay, let's make sure we're still moving forward here and not backwards. Brian Peterson says, get ready for Chenander to be back at DC. I can't think of anyone in the world who would want that less to happen than you, Bailey. You hated Chenander.
I didn't like him. I don't know enough about what he's done since then. I know he's at Boise State right now, and they're doing pretty well. So
he's doing a good job.
I don't know if he's calling the defense. Someone pointed that out to me the other day. I think it might be the head coach, but I don't know. Whatever. I don't want to sit here and talk about Eric Chenander until I have to. But
I can't wait for while we're recording this, it's a break that UCF has hired defensive coordinator Eric Chenander to head back.
And I'd go into that with an open mind, but I think what you said, like, there's 2 things, and I don't remember all of them, but I think so. Obviously, Scott Frost took the whole staff with him to Nebraska. Didn't he end up firing quite a few of them?
I think Troy Walters got fired pretty early on, which I don't know what. I never understood what the deal was, because remember, Troy Walters, wasn't he the one who was also left behind? Like,
originally,
Frost announced he was taking his whole staff except Troy Walters to Nebraska. Then 2 weeks went by and he was like, all right, I guess we'll hire Troy Walters too. And they
because Walters was supposed to be the interim coach.
Yes. And I don't know if that was always the plan or what, but 2017 was weird, guys. If you weren't, like really a diehard UCF fan or around for that, it was like all of November, everyone knew that Frost was probably going to end up at Nebraska. And it was just a question of if he was going to pull the trigger. And we had some weird accesses, because basically also media access was so different when Frost was here. And I'm praying to go back to that. Like, I could email the SID the night before access and say, I'd like to talk to Adrian Killins. They go, cool. And I would talk to him. And that was how it worked. So we would talk to position coaches all the time and stuff. And it would always be like any coach goes up and, it's like, oh, they're preparing for the Temple game. And there's like, so coach, What do you think about going to Nebraska? Is that something that's going to happen? And I remember there was one access, and like I said, I hope I'm not misquoting, where Chenander got asked and was basically like, no one wants to leave. He was like, we like Orlando. No one wants to leave. And that was like a week before Frost in Nebraska. It was such a weird situation where I think from the outside, it was just a typical story of, oh, G5 coach does well and leaves for Power 5. But on the ground level at UCF, it seemed like no one on staff really wanted to do it. Like everyone just wanted to stay, which is kind of funny. But
yeah. And in this one, I think the other thing I wanted to say before we move on to kind of just talk about Frost's reintroductory press conference, I guess you can call it. What you said about the nostalgia hires, I agree with. And then I want to bring somebody up that I don't even think counts as a nostalgia hire. So I think he doesn't fall under someone you wouldn't want. And I think Sean Beckton's a guy that he's probably going to have on staff and should have on staff because he's a guy that should just always be around. And, you know, he was there before. He was back as recently as this past year as an analyst. And yeah, I think that one doesn't necessarily fall under the nostalgia hire because one, because he's already here, and two, because how long has he been an assistant coach now? I think that's
Sean Beckton is grandfathered into whatever position he wants. He can be head coach and Frost can step down for all I care. Like that one I'm fine with. I also think we pretty much know because Neville Clark posted an Instagram story of him in a room with Frost and Sean Beckton. So I think
and then there was also when Frost, we'll talk about his press conference. In his press conference, he like made a reference to kind of building his staff, and he had mentioned he made a kind of a glancing reference to Sean Beckton. Who and I said it to you earlier, and it was a reference that came from my old high school baseball coach. We had an assistant coach that had been was just always around, and he just would always be there. And when we were getting introduced to our coaching staff, our coach was like, "Yeah, that's Coach Freddie. Like he comes with the furniture here. Like he's just always here." So that's kind of how I feel about Sean Beckton. He should just always be around. With UCF. So
also UCF sending out offers now, and they're all to wide receivers. So I think that also signals maybe who they've hired on staff so far.
Yeah.
So congrats to Sean Beckton, wide receivers coach.
That's actually great. I didn't even consider that, but no, that's a good point.
I'm assuming they wanted to get the Milton announcent out first and all the fanfare that came with that, which was admittedly very cool. So they're building out quite the staff, very UCF heavy staff. This is the most, I don't know what the hell's going to happen. This is just a wild
we'll see.
Start to this whole thing, and we'll just have to see what happens.
Yeah, which I think we can take ourselves now to that press conference, and I think even kind of going in the face of what we were just talking about, I think one of the things I liked about it was Frost kind of acknowledging obviously what they have done. John Grubb says, "Bring back my plastic season ticket with the UCF lanyard." I don't want to get onto that because I hate what has happened to season tickets and physical copies of tickets in the digital age because I collected my paper tickets forever, and I still have them, but they don't do that anymore.
I also didn't want to put that. I almost didn't want to put that one up because I knew it would immediately derail you, but I just couldn't resist.
I don't even remember what I was saying. Frost kind of acknowledging obviously how great it is to be back. You know, all the fun and the memories he had of his time in Orlando, how special it was to him, while also acknowledging there's work to be done, and this isn't 2017, and this isn't, we're not going undefeated this year. And I think what's funny is he said that line. He said, "I hope no one thinks we're going undefeated this year," and everyone laughed. And I hope they laughed at haha, yeah, I agree, not oh, Scott, yes we are, because it's not happening. And I hope people give him that time. And I just do like the way he approached this press conference, and I'm sure this is the way he's approaching the job as a whole. Is things are different, and you've got to adapt, and you can't just be like, "Oh, it's the 7 years ago again." You've got to move forward.
No, sure you can.
No,
it's 2017 again. Congrats, everybody. Book your playoff tickets, but
be 7 years younger.
That's ideal. I'm less worried about fans thinking that the team's going to go undefeated. I don't think, unless you're crazy, I don't think any fans actually believe this team is going to go undefeated next year. I don't expect that anyone is believing that. What I'm more interested in is does the general fan base understand how freaking far this roster has to go to even be competitive again? Because my goal right now for next season is just try to get back to a goal. And honestly, I don't even know if that's an attainable goal yet. They went 4-8 last year. They're losing everybody, all their production, not even just guys who were graduating, and it was a very senior heavy team anyway, but just, when you have a coaching change, the whole roster dissolves. And we'd kind of, I'm not upset they hired Frost, but we kind of rooted for a talent infusion coming through with if they hired a G5 coach or someone, or even a coordinator, a sitting coordinator who could bring some players with them. That's not happening with this staff because it's Frost and it's Milton and it's not guys who have those connections. So if it's just me next season, I think you might just root for being like 5-7, and it was with a bunch of young guys who were fun. Like, let's just have a 2016-esque year. And that's what I'm curious if fans are ready for. I don't think fans think they're going to go undefeated, but do fans understand that this is a multi-year rebuild project? That's the reason Gus was ready to go, is because there's no switch flipping happening here. I mean, this is going to be a rebuild.
Yeah. And I think most people should, and would understand all that. I just worry a little bit about the extreme examples elsewhere in college football. Mario says 16-0 or Frost got to go. Just the extreme examples, because you and I have talked about it in the past about like college football is very year to year at this point, and there are examples of big talent infusions from the portal, and we haven't seen a lot of those teams, I guess, this year succeed in going to the playoff or winning national championships, but you can turn things around pretty quickly. But I don't want everybody to see that elsewhere and think, oh, that means it happens everywhere, because we just saw, and it's not even necessarily a turnaround, but we saw the opposite of it with Florida State, where they lost some guys after going 13-0 the regular season, and then they bring in a portal heavy team and they go 2-10. So like it doesn't always work. So you see how like Frost can't just go to the portal and say, we're turning over this whole team, we're going to turn around, we're going to be 10-2 next year. That doesn't always happen. So I hope people aren't expecting that to be that extreme example to be what happens here. It could happen, but probably not.
Sure, it's not. But yeah, I think
I got to start advising against you going with like really heavy. I guess that's you going against yourself as a person, but going heavy on opinions and just stating them as fact when we'll have like 4 days pass and then we're like, oh, Frost is that coach.
My entire vibe is just stating things as a fact when I have no idea if they're going to work out that way. And it's very fun. Let's do it some more for the rest of the pod. But just circling back to the presser, I don't want to use the term he won the press conference, because wow, did we use that with Gus a lot, and it's not necessarily indicative of anything. And I think he was always going to win it. I mean, good Lord. It's like, Frost was here for basically exactly 2 years. I think he was hired in December of 2015 and he was gone at the end of December 2017. This is a very, very short amount of time he was here. Gus was here twice as long as Frost was. And I feel like in some ways I'd almost underestimated the impact he'd had, because even though he left, even though he went to another job, he's always been beloved by this fan base. And he has a mythological mythical status with this fan base. Fans love him. They revere him. Those times are thought on so fondly. And I think that UCF sort of falling off over the last few years has contributed to that even more and made that time even more legendary. But it was just to see him back and not just see the excitement on social media, not see how amped everybody is, even people like me who were not super on board with this hire and are now very, very locked in. It was, they invited shareholders to the presser. I'm pretty sure every shareholder who exists showed up. There were like hundreds of people in the room, and just the cheer, excitement, the energy. It would be like, I don't even know what the example is. It would be like if Nick Saban announced he was coming back to Alabama next year or something. Like it's shocking and it's cool. And so that was exciting to see, because I think that energy can translate into money and resources that maybe not some other coaches they were considering towards the end there would have had. But I feel like he personally won the press conference for me if I was giving up the scores, because I was a little freaked that it was going to be a big nostalgia kick, that it was just going to be, we're going to run it back and we're going to do exactly what we did last time. And I know how to win here, and we're going to be UC fast and UC fierce. And Frost was very candid, more candid than he was when he was the coach here last time, because he was not candid answers about how they are going to have to do things differently. He was very open about that. This is not the job he took over in 2016. He was asked straight up, are UC fast and UC fierce coming back? All the shareholders cheer. Everyone is like, hell yeah, they are. And Frost kind of smiles and goes, we'll see. And he talks about how they're in a different league now, and they can't just necessarily do exactly what they did last time. And I do think part of that is, as we've tried to learn about what went wrong with him at Nebraska, it does sound like a big chunk of it is he just took what he was doing at 2017 UCF and tried to do it there. And it was a different job and it failed. And it seems like he's learned that lesson. So my big fear was that he was going to go out there and just say all this crazy stuff of we're going to run it back, whatever. And he was so measured and so open about how this is a different job and they're going to play it differently, that it did ease a lot of my concerns. It did make me feel like, okay, I don't think this is a suicide hire where everyone's just, in on nostalgia and it's going to fail. I think he actually can have a real plan here to get this turned around a different way than he did last time. And the benefits of the hype around him and the love this fan base has for him and how everyone is going to be rooting for this with all they have is that people are going to be willing to put up more money for this. Fans are going to be more excited for this. There's going to be more buzz around the program for this. And just, can he harness that with the lessons he learned from Nebraska to really try to build something here?
Yeah. And I think there is something to that feeling of just the re-energize, or I don't know how to say that word, but I guess the revival of the energy within the fan base and within donors, because we are, and this is just one example, but we're now how many months? 8 months, I guess. Or actually, no, it's almost fully a year now because KJ, I think, committed on New Year's Day. We're about a year from shelling out all that money to a quarterback who ended up playing for 5 games. So maybe donors might have felt a little burnt by that, or just, I don't know if I want to, do that again this offseason. Now Scott Frost is here, and they're like, oh yeah, I'll give Scott Frost my money. Like, oh, Frost can, it's kind of a clean slate with the donors, and I'm speaking for other people's money, which probably isn't a good thing to do. But I think there is, I think there will be kind of a natural want to do that, and I think there was a lot in that press conference that made me feel like this is a guy who's learned a lot from failures at Nebraska. And you pushed back on this last week, but I still think there's something to him spending a few months with the Rams. And he's talked about kind of what that did for him. And I know you said, like, oh, Sean McVay wasn't mentoring him like every day he was coaching the team, but sitting in on those meetings and seeing how they run things and kind of even getting more familiar with their concepts and their offense and learning how to evolve his own offense and what he wants to do. I think there's stuff that he will have taken from that experience. So yeah. I think he's learned a lot, and it was, and part of my hesitation, and I mentioned it on the podcast when we were live last week about, him coming back into a spot where he hasn't been in college football for 2 years. He is, jumping back in at a time when NIL is going crazy and there's the portal and all this stuff, roster management. I think there's still maybe a little bit that I'm concerned with about that, but I think he's prepared to handle it. And I do, think that as long as he makes the right hires, there is stuff that he can kind of bridge the gap with some coaches who have been in this, like you said earlier. And I think too, it just feels like there's that's what I was going to say. My other concern was, the last time we saw him was things were not going well at Nebraska, and now his next head coaching job is just going from that to this. That felt concerning, but I don't know. It just feels like there's a lot that he's learned, and there could be a lot that he turns around this time.
Yeah, to be clear, I don't know. I'm trying to toe the line of, first off, I just have to say there's a scandal going on in the YouTube chat right now. We've had an anonymous faceless user claim that Milton was a bad hire. And I think that's a comment that you probably need to put a face on, but I'm sure the chat will sort itself out. This is what you don't get from pre-recorded podcasts. So
when you said that, I was like, what's going on? I didn't think it was going to be a little bit more scandalous than that.
So I think that's as scandalous as it gets. But yeah, I think that so I was listening to, because I was trying to find as much national reaction as I could to this, because I assumed it would be largely negative, and it kind of has been. And I was listening to the Andy Staples podcast with Andy and Ari at On3, and they had a whole segment on it, which I was like, okay, let's listen to this. And Andy brought up a good point that made me a little uneasy, and it's something I hadn't thought about, is that, we have seen coaches before, go to a P4 job and not do well and they get fired, and then they just bounce back somewhere, they go become an offensive coordinator. Frost was like blacklisted from college football over how it went in Nebraska. Like, he could not find a job and was trying to find a job and ended up having to take a year off and then retreat to the NFL. And I don't know, is that alarm bells to some degree that this isn't just your typical, I don't know, like Dana Holgerson or whoever, like, yeah, got fired. People did not like the vibe of that program by the time he was leaving it and how it had degraded. I don't know.
So that's what I'm curious about. What was he looking for a job last year?
Andy Staples on his show said, yeah, that they'd heard that was a thing. So I don't know. And you never know at the end of the day. I think that, that definitely was. It was kind of, you and I used to talk about how surprising it was how he just vanished. Mm-hmm. We assumed that he would catch on somewhere and whatever, but
that's kind of why I wondered if he was taking a year off. He was getting paid by Nebraska and was wondering if he was taking a year off to be with his kids. Like, I think
that's perfectly believable too. I think it is too. I do think that I don't know. It's kind of what we talked about in our first podcast, is that this is the only Power 4 program that would have even taken a phone call from him. So there is a little bit of trepidation there. But again, I'm not talking about my interest in this hire and my belief that it can work, I don't know if it will, but my belief that it can work is not in because it worked in 2017. It's because of the way it's energized the administration and the fan base and the shareholders and everyone else. It's can you capture that energy and that goodwill and turn it into something? So we will see.
Yeah, and I think that was also part of this press conference that I found interesting was that he sounded like he was liking kind of where he was with the Rams and thinking about how he could rise up the ladder there. And he said he wouldn't just take another college job, just any other job. And this one, he said he wasn't expecting this one to become available, but when it was, obviously, he jumped at it. And I think that's another part of why this could work is just his passion for, and obviously passion doesn't just translate to wins, but just it's something what Terry said. Like kind of Terry said it in the press conference of like, there was nobody who was as passionate or who wanted this job more than him. And I do like that. I do like that feeling.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, we got.
Do you want to address the Nutcracker?
If you listen to the podcast for any amount of time, you see the comment here. We have discussed at length doing a Nutcracker podcast because I have two very large Nutcrackers and doing a holiday themed podcast. Maybe we will week of Christmas. We'll just have to see what we're in the mood for.
You have both of the Nutcrackers, so
I do have both of the Nutcrackers.
Place, so.
Aren't you going to be here this weekend? Did I make that up?
Yeah, but What, are we just going to do a podcast on Saturday?
Yes, we will. But I did on the topic of him possibly staying in the NFL. It was I wanted to read a little Twitter thread from Darren Stoltzfus at Wesh. I don't know if I'm pronouncing the last name right. Pressure cooker guy to you would be, probably how to identify him. And he posted a Twitter thread about how he went to go shoot a stand-up at the Bounce House after the press conference, and Frost was there, and they ended up chatting. And Frost told him that he was conflicted about taking the job because he had a good path laid out for him in the NFL. He put in his time and he was going to have legit NFL coaching offers next year. Not a head coach, obviously, but start working his way up that ladder. The NFL life, guys, a lot more relaxed than the college football life these days. There's a reason coaches are heading in that direction. And he said what he told them that it came down to was just, it wasn't about, I'm going to go undefeated. And it was just coming back to a place that he said he loved going to work every single day. And he just felt like he had to go for it. And I think that's part of the magic of this too, until it all fails. Is that there are so many coaches who come through schools all across the country and work very hard and have success, but it's pretty rare to have a coach with such a connection to the university that Frost has. I mean, we don't talk enough about that. And I don't even know if we talked enough about it when we had our podcast of him getting hired. This is a guy who is from Nebraska, won a national championship as Nebraska's quarterback, is all in on Nebraska. He's the most Nebraska guy imaginable. And when Nebraska calls to offer him their head coaching job, where his whole family is there and his dad is there, he didn't know what to do because that's how connected he was to UCF. And it was an incredibly hard job for him. We have this. I mean, look, this was his presser the day that he was leaving UCF. And it was just, you and I were there. It was just an incredibly emotional day. And there was a sense of, God, it was almost like a funeral, him talking about leaving. It wasn't a situation where it was just, hell yeah, this is the next step for me. And I think that's why UCF fans love him so much too, is it's not just the success he had here. It's the way he embraced UCF like no other coach except like maybe O'Leary has, and really just to a different degree and in such a short amount of time. So I'm watching that presser and I can't believe it's real life. And everything he says, I'm just sitting there and I'm like, God, I want this to work. I want this to work more than anything. It's actually going to make, I feel like we're in this weird situation now where, guess what? I always want the UCF hires to work. They've never hired someone. I've been like, who cares? This is like, my life. I live and breathe for this stuff. But it feels like starting next year, every loss is going to feel every win is going to feel twice as good. And every loss is going to hurt twice as bad because it's not just UCF winning or losing anymore. I can't imagine a situation that we're going to get into like where we were with Gus this year, where there's just vitriol and anger. If this goes badly and there comes a time when it's time for Frost to go, it's going to be so painful. Yeah, for everyone involved. Oh God.
What?
Oh man, I didn't even think about that. What if they have to fire Milton someday?
I don't. We're not getting.
Don't say they wouldn't.
He was just hired today. He was just hired.
Oklahoma fired Josh Heupel.
I don't care. We're not getting into that today. On this.
Welcome to the Pegasus Podcast, where I can take us to the absolute most negative possibility imaginable, just on a whim. But yeah, that won't happen, guys. They're gonna win all the games. I don't think they'll lose one.
It will. There's going to be a different level, because like he is, like you say, he's our guy.
Yes.
Like it's even more so than he was when he was here in 2017 and when he left. Like, now that he's come back, he is our guy. Dolly says KZ will leave to FSU again. Depends on what happens with Gus there. If Gus ends up retiring or being fired, I like this one better. This is a better version. Matt Dolan saying Milton will be promoted to head coach when Frost retires in 15 years. Like, imagine Milton being the quarterback's coach for 5 years, and he had to be an offensive coordinator. I wish that was happening. I wish that, like, if you could
to the spectrum on that one,
if you could play out your perfect scenario, that never would ever happen because coaches will be in their current roles for 2 years and then leave. Yeah, Milton would still be here.
Yeah,
for a long
but
time,
you know what? We used to have you and I had a conversation as recently as like 4 months ago about like, God, it would be cool if Frost could come back as the head coach one day. Too bad that will never happen. And then it happened like a few months later. So screw it. Congrats to Mackenzie Milton on becoming UCF's head coach in 2035. I'm very happy for him. But yeah,
that's only like 2 years after the final UF game.
Man, Frost has to make it to the UF game. I think that's my personal.
When is that again? 2030?
2031, I want to say.
Here's
a question. Do you feel better about the start of I almost said the Gus Malzahn era, about the Scott Frost era? I don't know why I keep doing that, guys. I guess because I said it for 4 years, basically the whole time this podcast existed. Do you feel better about the start of the Scott Frost era, that it's going to go Jacksonville State, winnable? They just won Conference USA, though, so maybe they'll lose that, and it'll be the worst day of my whole entire life. North Carolina A&T, bye week that they could put a conference game in, and then Bill Belichick in the bounce house. Does that make you feel better or worse?
Better, I think, because I mean, in the past couple of years, well, not really last year because they had the Boise State game in week 2, but this year especially, we were like, we're going to get 3 weeks into the season or into week 3 and not know anything about this team, and that kind of happened. It did happen, and then we learned a lot of bad things in the first half of the TCU game in week 3. Then we learned some maybe good things that we thought were good things, and turns out TCU just collapsed in that game. But yeah, no, having those 2 games is going to be huge, I think, just because we don't know anything about what the roster is going to look like at this point. But by then, we'll obviously have a better idea. But
that's the best thing we can do this podcast. Let's preview the UNC game next year. We're not totally sure Belichick's going to be the coach. I couldn't tell you one UCF player I'm 100% certain will be on the roster, but that's weird, man. Not them not having players. That's expected. What's weird is I just can't believe that in no way as recently as a week and a half ago would I ever have believed you when you would have said, what, we're going to have a Scott Frost versus Bill Belichick game in the bounce house. Great point from Brian Peterson, by the way. This game is not going to be played. Every time UCF has tried to play UNC, it's gotten canceled. There was the game that you and I had tickets to that we were going to in North Carolina, and we had that photos back.
I was going to say something about that too earlier, and then we got completely off of that completely, and so it doesn't even make sense to bring up. But it was more so, I'll do it anyway. It's our podcast. That photo kind of reminded me. There's another one, and I think it's in the perfect season book that the Orlando Sentinel put together at the time. There's a picture of him from his Nebraska introductory press conference where he just looks sad in that photo too. This is a huge day, and he just looks like. And I know maybe it's more of Scott Frost's serious face because he kind of had that even on Sunday when he was back at UCF, but he just looks sad. And it was the fact that it was that hard of a decision for him to take that job again, like you said, speaks to his love for Orlando and UCF. And I don't know, we can't spend forever on the press conference. Is there anything else you want to get to before we kind of move on?
Yes, there were actually. Just one thing, maybe 2 or 3. We'll see what happens. What's great about this is Up All Night is like waiting for us to be done so they can do their live show. So I'm going to try to make this podcast.
We're just going to be up all night. We'll do
3 or 4
hours.
We're going to really test it. Like Up All Night is about to mean 4 a.m. Get ready to learn 4 a.m., buddy. But one other big thing from the I was about to say from the podcast, but we're the podcast. Look at that 2018 Navy, first time they wore anthracite jerseys and anthracite pants with the black helmet. We did see that combo in a spring game the year before. That was the first time we saw it on the field. It was also the return of the state of UCF.
This is not what we're here for. I mean, what is going on? What just happened?
I'm sorry. If you're listening to the audio version, we have a photo up of Milton from that game, and I got distracted by the uniform. This is why we can't. This is where StreamYard's killing us. I can't have photos because it's like I guess I just have like undiagnosed ADHD. Like you put up a photo and I'm done with whatever I was talking about. But
yeah,
what was I talking? Oh, right. Okay. So one thing he brought up in the presser that I thought was really interesting and a very anti-Gus comment is he was asked about his philosophy as far as roster building and NIL and the portal, and he gave a very, very different answer than we ever heard from Gus about the portal. And Default is saying the fact that Christian knew the date and exact uniform combo. Guys, I know every uniform.
Yeah, this is not. I didn't even blink twice at that because
I'd assume people
will see a photo pop up. Christian will know it and he'll quiz me on it. And sometimes I know him.
I don't mean I know most of them. I mean, if you gave me a game, I could tell you what they were for the game. But that's fine. Why aren't you guys like that? You're the ones with the problem. But
you're never prouder of me as a friend than when I get those questions right.
I threw a wild one at you when you were here last time. Like, I think I threw like 2017 UConn at you just to see, and you did get it, if I remember right. I don't know if it was 2017 UConn, because now I'm going to quiz you. You're not going to know right now. Whatever. It was some random poll from like years ago, and you did get it right. And I was really, really proud of you. JP Gilbert's chiming in to make me mad. I'm not even putting his comment up on the screen.
I want to see it. What does it say?
Oh, right. I forgot Bailey can't see them. He says time to admit that practice mode white is a bad uniform. Thank you, JP. Matt Dolan says that is an impressive talent question. I promise you it is not. It's a problem, but I'm never going to be able to say what I'm trying to say about the transfer portal.
Nope.
Frost was asked about that, and he, Gus obviously leaned into the portal heavily, and Frost talked about how they need to build through high school, and everyone understands the portal is a tool, and you need to use the portal to supplement. No one's saying don't use the portal, but he gave this answer about NIL and how important it is, and he's happy players are getting the money, but that if they have money to give, he'd like it to go to someone that they've developed and built out of high school versus someone they're renting from the portal. And that, to me, is the big thing. And I don't want to overly fault Gus for it, because when he came in and they started taking very small high school classes to make room for the portal, I thought it was the right choice. I thought that made sense, because I thought that was how you build up to Power 4 talent very quickly. The cost ended up being in culture and in buy-in. And I think Frost understanding that and his goal being to rectify that, I think that was really exciting and really telling. I was very scared he was going to go up there and be like, and like, before we say all this, they are going to have to hit the portal very hard this offseason. There's no way around that, because it's year one. That's just the way it is. They've already had a recruiting class. It's more next offseason when Frost has had a full class of his guys recruited. That's when I don't expect or want to see them just trying to find a bunch of 1-year rentals from the portal, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, and I liked, kind of, I don't remember if it was that exact time or if it was a different point he was making, but kind of how he was talking about recruiting Florida and saying, we found Gabe Davis right up the street and Tristan Hill, and then the previous staff found Traquan Smith, and they found Richie Grant up in the Panhandle, and he's talking about how special these players are and that there are more of them around Florida. And that kind of spoke to me in a way that made me feel like, all right, yeah. And again, like, I'm prepared for this to be a building process. Like, I think that is where this program is right now. Unfortunately, it's unfortunate that things have fallen the way they have. But I think this is a building process, and I think he understands that. And I don't know. I like that thought. And I did want to bring up the quote that he had said that I think has kind of resonated with a lot of people. I've seen some people take it the wrong way, but I think it's kind of profound. And it was another one of those things where it's like he's learned a lot. And he said, when you're climbing the ladder of success in life, sometimes they forget to tell you to stop when you're happy. I've seen some people taking that as saying like UCF's lower on the ladder. I don't think that's what he was saying at all. I think he was saying,
sometimes get a grip. UCF is lower on the ladder. Nebraska is one of the
that's not even a UCF fan that I'm responding to about that. I think that was like a Florida fan that was trying to say, like, is he saying this is a step down?
Are there UCF fans who are like, we believe that we're better than Nebraska? They're actually probably say it out loud. And I immediately realized that there are, but that's fine.
But I just thought that was a really like profound thought that he was very happy here. And see, this is the other bad thing about StreamYard is you're reacting to comments and making
anonymous YouTube users going crazy in the comments. I'm not even repeating that one. I don't know. This guy is just faceless and throwing all kinds of nonsense out there. But yeah, I'm sorry. I guess I shouldn't make faces while you can't see the comments.
It's okay. Very early in the podcast, and I'm going to bring this up because now we're on this topic. Very early in the podcast, I got a text from my brother that Goga dunked on Giannis, and I went like this, like that. And realized I did it on camera, but I was just mad that I didn't get to see it. So, yeah. Anyway, where were we going?
I thought that comment, and then I like how I thought we were just going to do the presser you thought we were just going to do the presser for this podcast, and I said let's add a whole other topic, and now we're 45 minutes in and still on this. But I did think that quote was really cool because I thought that quote was telling. Because one thing going into the presser that I was really curious about was I didn't expect Frost to go out there and be like, "Hey guys, going to Nebraska was a mistake," because that's just not just how you do things. But he was very open about stuff that we'd heard off the record and on conversations for years about how hard this was for him and how he kind of did feel like he made the wrong choice. And for him to I thought that was, I'm surprised that anyone could take that comment as always saying UCF is lower on the ladder, because I thought that was a shocking and heartwarming admission for him to open that presser by essentially saying, I wish I had not left the first time. I should have stayed. And that's powerful to me. And this is a powerful hire from a vibes standpoint, from an emotion standpoint. I just want to see how they capitalize on it. Really quickly, then we'll do the next thing. I also, the comments about, and this kind of folds to the next thing, so I guess could have held on to it, but the comments about, they found Gabe Davis, they found Richie Grant. What I like about that too is UCF needs to recruit stars. We all know that. That's the talent. But it never felt like there were a ton like in Gus's classes of just like really evaluating guys who were lowly rated. It was like Chasen Johnson and who else, as far as guys that weren't highly rated and hit out of high school. Just didn't really do that. And Frost's staff the first time around was really freaking good at finding those guys. And I'm hoping for more evaluation versus booms this time around. I still want the booms. I don't want the booms to go away. We're going to call them something else now. We'll call them
I don't want to call
Blizzards
them
or something. I don't know. We'll figure it out. But we need some evaluation in there too.
Blizzard just made me want Dairy Queen. Also,
Ross in all caps just tweets Blizzard. Get a recruit. Is Frost going to unlock his Twitter, by the way? His Twitter's been private for 3 years, and he's made no move to change that since he became UCF's head coach.
I doubt he wants to. I don't know if UCF's going to be like, hey, we're going to run this for you, but I doubt that he wants to.
I think the funnest thing, like we need a new bat signal, right? We need a new recruiting signal for when they sign guys. Because I don't believe we had anything with Frost the first time around. UCF wasn't like,
it wasn't that big of a
program. Josh Heupel, we had the bat signal, and then Gus, we all know the word that we've all said too many times. I think Frost should be that when they're about to get a commitment, he unlocks his Twitter account. And it'll be a thing where just like if you happen to notice, like it'll be like, oh, Frost's Twitter account is unlocked. That means
it's like when JP Gilbert unlocks his Twitter account.
Yeah, exactly right. Exactly.
And then I race to retweet as many things as I can as possible. A lot of times, okay, and we're going to move on to the next topic, I promise. We're really coming up against time here. But the other thing that I found was funny, and I don't know if it was, you tell me if you think it was on purpose, but both Terry and Frost said the words "this place" a lot, and I don't know if it was like meant to be a thing. I'm wearing the shirt, by the way. I did find it.
This place.
And I brought this up kind of just so that it wasn't a waste that I wore the shirt on the podcast. But I don't know. I just thought that was funny because like he kept saying it. I was like, oh, he said the thing, but I was like, I don't know if he's even doing that on purpose.
Chris Singh says, anyone got the magic score? I'd actually be very interested in that myself if someone wanted to drop it in the chat.
I love being live. Being live is great. I've looked at it a couple times, but I haven't looked at it in a few minutes. So they're down by 8. Toward the end of the third.
I wish I hadn't asked. Thanks.
Yep. All right. You want to move on to the next thing?
Let's do it.
Yeah, kind of just talking about Frost's to-do list. Like just obviously there's a lot of stuff on it. And I kind of almost want this conversation to be more about like what is the priority right now? Because there is so much for him to dive right into. The portal just opened on Monday officially. So there is that element of hitting the portal. But he was also asked a couple questions about kind of the situation itself. And he was like, you got to give me time to be here. Because he had landed like a few hours earlier, and I don't think he's had a chance to really look at the roster, look at who has entered the portal that he wants to convince to stay. He's got all that to balance. He's got to work the donors to spend some money on, these guys he wants in the portal. He's got to build his staff. Like there's a lot to go around right now. And I don't know how you even get to the point where you're like, all right, let me sit down and do this, this, and this.
And I think it's going to be, I would not want to be Frost right now. I mean, I'm sure the paycheck is nice. That part would be cool, but it's going to be a mad dash these next 28 days or however much longer the portal is open for here. I think it's 40. I think it's a 45-day window. So he's got a little bit of time because you are walking into a situation where, guys, I doubt Scott Frost, until he knew he was in it for the job, was just like keeping a close eye on UCF's roster and what the needs might be. Like this is all learning very quickly. And I am curious. It sounds like little to none of the current staff is going to be retained, but I'm assuming he still debriefed with those guys and probably learned about what they thought the needs are and where they need to go. But I mean, he's been out of college football. He's got to hire coaches and he's got to get guys in here fast. I mean, Brian Peterson's comment. We're getting there, buddy. Don't worry. Asking about some uniform news that we will talk about, but yeah, I mean, he's got to get there fast as far as not just bringing in new players, but figuring out what they need. And that's the main reason to me that 2025 is a rebuilding year, because this is such a short amount of time literally less than 2 months to hire a staff, get your staff in place, hit the portal hard because man, this roster is depleted, and just try to slap something together.
Right.
And then you'll
have a good phrase for it. Like you're throwing it together. Like,
and then you'll have the second signing day for high school recruits in February, but almost all of them sign in the early window now. And then you'll have a second portal window in April. But that window, historically, the post-spring window is very, very much guys who are just not finding out they're not going to play at their current stops and moving on. So those are going to be more. I mean, they got to do the heavy lifting now. Yeah. So it's going to be a mad dash. It's hire a staff and get going on the portal and just hope you hit on guys. I mean, that's really, and honestly, it's also figuring out who your priorities are here. Who are the guys that, you want to make sure don't leave. It's just information and a lot of learning very quickly.
Do you think, and I don't really know if I can think of an example of this, do you think there's a possibility that he ends up, and not that it would get an entire influx of talent, but if he hires a coordinator or a position coach from a job elsewhere, would they maybe be able to bring a player or two from their previous school? Does that stuff kind of stuff happen? Because I'm not that well versed on coordinators and all that, but
I can answer that a little bit. Yeah, it does happen to some degree, not all the time, but it depends on the situation. Like if they were to hire, I don't know, say they hire someone who's a positions coach. I mean, they got Ricky Barber because they hired Kenny Martin away from his original school. I mean, things like that do happen. I think the bigger thing is just how Frost has been out of college football for a little bit. If you hire staff who are in it, it might not necessarily be guys who are on their current teams, but guys that they recruited for several years out of high school, or guys that they went after in the portal who they have built-in relationships with and who they can speak to and who they can contact. That's why getting those hires in are so important. Now, it might not necessarily be guys on their roster in front of them, but guys who they have built those relationships with that they can entice to come to UCF. And the one good thing here is like if they had just taken over like Idaho or something, like this is going to be more difficult. UCF has very strong built-in recruiting advantages. Yeah. There are a ton of guys who are from here who, when things aren't going well, that's where they want to come home. It's a Power 4 program in Florida. They can attack this from two directions. They can attack this from guys who are maybe not getting as much playing time as they would have liked at the highest level. And they can attack this from guys who are in the G5 and are, I want to go play at a Power 4 school. And, they're in Florida. It's Frost. It's this great pitch. So they can do this. It's just, I think that, not that Gus avoided this with all the time he had, but I think the misses in this portal class will be plentiful just because they are working against such a deadline here to get a staff together, then start bringing guys in. So let's not start, when next year rolls around and there were portal guys we were excited about who didn't turn in anything, let's be very cognizant of the fact that, wow, is this a turnaround? And this is just not the way you're meant to build a team. So it is what it is for next year.
I think like the bar is pretty low though, isn't it?
I think so.
Like there were Gus had however much time and however many years, and there were hits in the portal. We've talked about that, but think about the wide receivers that he added last year, 2023, and none of them hitting. Like there's been times where he's completely struck out on some of these, whole positions in the portal, even though you bring in 3 guys. So the bar is kind of low, and that might play into an advantage for Frost. And I think what's interesting is kind of what you were just talking about, the built-in advantages. Like we're going to end up talking a little bit here about the recruiting class that just signed this past week before Frost was even hired. But yeah, I think there is, and you and I have talked in the past on the podcast a little bit, especially off the podcast, about how much of UCF's upswing in recruiting over the last few years has been Gus and how much has been the Big 12 being a Power 4 program in Florida. And I think we got some of our answer. Like, I'm not going to completely downplay all of Gus's contributions, but I think there is a completely different outlook now. And JP Gilbert says John Plumlee would have been catching punts under the Frost administration. No comment. I'm not going to.
It's the realest comment we've ever received.
Yeah.
Through Live Pegasus Pods, to be honest with you.
Yeah. Our long history of live podcasts. But it is. There are inherent advantages, and I think that's and again, the P4 thing being something that Frost didn't have last time. Curious to see how that affects, what he's able to do, because there will be some of that evaluation, like you mentioned, and how they were able to find these gems, but they also can't afford in this, this landscape to kind of take bigger swings at some guys.
Right.
And I think that's going to lead to some very, very talented players in his system that UCF might not have been able to get before.
Yeah. And we can talk about the recruiting class here really quickly. Before we do, I just want to say the chat is now just talking about wackadoos and has been for some time. We're fairly young. I believe wackadoos.
The chat's not watching us. They're not listening to anything we're saying.
I believe wackadoos closed. Did you experience wackadoos, or did it close after my freshman year?
I think it closed after your freshman year, because I remember. I don't think I ever went there. So my brother went to UCF in 2011, I think, in 2012, and I remember it being there.
Yeah,
and it might have been there when I went and toured in 2015, but I don't think I ever went.
Jake Speed just said, "Is someone talking?" LOL.
I don't like you guys. You guys are mean.
I did like wackadoo. Shame that it became a Chili's. Then a Chili's. Thanks, R. Mark. But anyway, onto the recruiting class.
Yeah. So this all happened what feels like 3 weeks ago, but it was actually 6 days ago. Brian, I'm done with you. The signing day happened last Wednesday, which was a full 3 days before UCF even had a coach. And guys still signed anyway, and some more kind of trickled in as the week went on. And I think at this point, like all of these guys that I'm about to read off didn't they all sign before they even announced Frost? I think they did. I mean, I'm
yeah,
sure
the vast majority of them, except I think for one or two, genuinely did not know who the coach was going to be when they committed to UCF. And if you are a UCF fan, that's a pretty sweet thing for sure. Because I just I don't know. I haven't long had the theory. I've had the theory for like a couple months because it was mainly Cope that I started to think, is it Gus or is it just the UCF moved on? And there are guys who always would have stayed home, but now can justify it more. And this class really proved, and I don't want to listen, Gus did a lot of bad things. I don't want to discount that he did elevate recruiting in a huge way for UCF. I don't just want to toss that out the window. These guys aren't recruiting to just UCF. I know those relationships played a big role, but when you see things like Tavion Swint publishes this letter just talking about his love of UCF and how it was never about Gus and how he wants to be the hometown hero. And the fact that the whole hometown hero thing has somehow transcended coaching staffs, and that's just become a thing that players want for a university this young is really cool. And now you're in a situation where these are guys who were, 9, 10, 11 when Scott Frost was here and UCF was going undefeated and being a big deal. They remember that, and maybe they want to be a part of that. And I think that is an asset. And the one thing I want to bring up is this is a weird recruiting class that was assembled by itself. And also Terry Mahadra, who's getting on the phone and being like, come here, even though we don't know who's going to coach you. UCF, according to 247, has the last class in the Big 12. They have the 16th class with 14 commits. Interesting part of that is that the average player rating is 87.76, which is second highest in the entire conference behind Colorado. So the class fell apart. They only signed a handful of guys, but the guys they signed are really good.
Yeah.
And they're not all going to hit, obviously, but it's not the worst situation for Frost to be in, where it's not like they skipped a class entirely. He's going to have some guys to play around with here and get the fan base excited next year that could really make an impact right away. Like Tavion Swint with the hole at running back, he could be a guy you see right away. I mean, Wade and Charles at wide receiver, there are no wide receivers on the roster, so he'll probably be able to step up immediately. I mean, and that's what next year is to me, and what I hope to see from this recruiting class is that's how you get. It's how what we talked about this year was part of what made going 4-8 so not okay. Was they were doing it with a bunch of guys who were not going to be here next year. You were building toward nothing, and fans will accept that same record next year. They'll be pissed about it because it's 4-8 again, but it's so much more palatable when it's a bunch of freshmen and sophomores who are getting their feet under them and showing flashes of potential. And you can tell yourself, well, come 2026, when these guys have had another year in the program, another year in the weight room, another year getting coached up, that this could really start to be something. That's how you keep a fan base engaged through being bad. UCF Mayor points out Burdell is here. I actually couldn't remember if he was one that was a transfer or not. It's hard to keep track. I missed the whole Nigel Lee Kelly thing. Like I didn't even see that. So we're too many guys hitting the portal. It's a whole thing. But I really do. There is a roadmap here. There is, and it's not going to be easy. It never is. And every coaching hire is a crapshoot. So we just kind of have to see what happens. But there are worse positions to be in than the one UCF is in, even though next year is going to be rough.
Yeah, and so I do want to say about that letter that Tavion Swint, wrote. This is USA Today, kind of talking about being a Knight and being okay with committing to UCF without a coach because he just loves UCF. I think, and part of this is kind of like there's a big gap now that RJ Harvey's gone, and not really knowing who else is going to be on the roster. But I think Tavion Swint's my favorite UCF player right now, and he hasn't even gotten on campus yet. So I appreciated that. That letter he wrote a lot, and then just kind of the sentiment behind it. But the list here of guys who signed: linebacker Malachi Boone, offensive lineman Jacques Joyner, defensive back Tony Williams, who we talked about last week, actually. Defensive back Raheem Stroud, wide receiver Cozy Isaac, wide receiver Carl Jenkins Jr., which was a surprise, I think, right? I mean, he decommitted at one point. I don't think he ever committed anywhere else, and then he signed. Defensive tackle Ryshawn Perry, another wide receiver who you mentioned, Wade and Charles, Tavion Swint, and tight end Caden Pining. They also got a JUCO running back, Wayman Jordan Jr., who committed. I believe Cam Martin and the previous staff were committing. He was the one who I think he visited for the Utah game, and he ends up committing. And then offensive lineman Laparca Langston committed today or signed today.
One of the top,
best name I've ever heard in my life.
One of the top JUCO recruits out there. Incredible name, top tier.
I think he's like 6'8", 310 or something like that. Like that's and to be
he's
named.
He's gonna make Rubo look small.
He might be my favorite player. I don't know much about him, but I know like his name, and he's just a giant. So.
We already love 2025 UCF. We love all players. What could go wrong?
This is great. But no, and I do think so some of this is I think in a way, and it's simple to put it this way, and there's way more to it, but UCF does kind of recruit itself in some ways. I know there were coaches still they were still working behind the scenes, and I know Terry thanked them for doing so. And I'm sure, there were plenty of those guys doing that. So that is something to that. But yeah, they didn't know. They were probably telling these recruits like they couldn't have known that they were still going to be here, or if they're still going to be here, they might not be. And they couldn't tell them who the new head coach was going to be. So there is still an element of UCF just being attractive on its own, which is really cool.
It's a good spot to be in.
Yeah. You want to jump into the football news?
Let's do it.
All right. RJ Harvey was named first team All Big 12, righting a wrong from last year. It was a relief to see that. I knew it was going to happen, but it was still a relief to see it. Lee Hunter was named second team All Big 12, and then UCF had 5 players named as Big 12 Player of the Year honorable mentions. That was Kobe Hudson, Amari Kite, Ricky Barber, Nigel Kelly, and RJ Harvey. Mac McWilliams recently accepted an invite to the East-West Shrine Bowl preparation for the NFL Draft. And I don't know. I can't keep track of all of the portal entries. I've got 2 from today, Jonathan Klein and punter Mitch McCarthy. They both entered the portal. And Herb Hand is the new offensive line coach at Florida State, so he will not be on staff. Don't know if he would have been anyway, but he will not be. The other thing, I know the chat was mentioning it earlier, like you said, and you probably want to talk about it. UCF uniform news. You want to kind of tease that a little bit? I guess I don't know.
Well, it's going to come up in a minute here. So.
All right then. Let's not. Game of the week: UCF men's basketball 7-2. They are playing Tulsa on Saturday, 4-6. This is I forget what it's called, the Orange Bowl Classic in Sunrise, 2:00 tip off. UCF are trying to get to 8-2, and I don't know. I'm surprised at how quickly Big 12 play is coming up because I believe it starts on New Year's Eve. So that's coming up quickly. Hopefully UCF can finish strong in non-conference play. Tweet of the week.
Tweet of the week. Tweet of the week this week is Uniform Scoop of the Week instead, because how could we not devote an entire segment to just this? So if you were watching Sons of UCF Live last night, they had Eric DeSalvo on as a guest, and Eric was asked on my behalf, even though I don't believe I submitted that question, was asked on my behalf if there's
any more
uniform things. By Adam, if there's any more uniform things. I fully support my name being used to try to get uniform scoops. Like, just throw me out there and see what happens. But
it's almost like Adam was too embarrassed to ask it on his own, and he was just like, I can just use Christian's name.
It's like, yeah, my friend is curious about the UCF uniforms. If you can tell me
who's the friend? Oh, Christian.
Christian, the crazy guy who can name all the combos. But so he was asked if there's Eric DeSalvo was asked if there's anything new uniform related coming for UCF, and he said, "quote We'll have uniform news as the summer grows closer. We were due for a refresh from our uniforms the past couple years, and so those refreshes have been submitted to Nike." That's pretty big news. That's pretty exciting news. Matt Dolan asks, how much would Christian pay to see the package DeSalvo sent to Nike? I would drain my savings account, man. I don't even care just to see a glimpse of it. And here's what's exciting is for those of you who thought I was here to talk about uniforms, I'm actually here to get mad at you. So let's do it. I am very excited to see UCF's refresh uniforms. And what I'm not so excited for is, let's be clear about one thing that I will never let die. These 2022 to present uniforms were really freaking good. You know why? Because they were just freaking refreshes of the uniforms from 2016 to 2021. And I already know what's going to happen. I'm calling it right now. They're going to drop these refresh uniforms whenever they do. And they're going to be not that different from what they have right now. But because Scott Frost is the head coach, everyone who hates the current uniforms are going to be like, oh my God, Drip U is back. The Frost magic is alive. We've made it. And they're going to be the same freaking thing. Like, I am not, Jake Speed just said, ditch the gold face guards. And that's the worst message I've ever received in this chat. That's up there with the anonymous YouTube user guy. That's the gold face masks were amazing. But what I will not let people forget is that they have worn some awesome uniforms. And I will go so far as to say that the 2024 UCF uniform slate was the best slate of uniforms in UCF history. We had some incredible looks this year, just in a wide variety we had 2 blackouts that are probably the 2 best blackouts in UCF history, and they could not be more different. There was the all black and white, the Sinister Shamu uniform to start the year. Then they ended the year with the all black and gold, the night mode, the gold numbers, the gold face mask. Hell of a year. Hell of a year. We love it.
Hell of a year. Yeah, no, I agree. It was great. We got to do now. You know what I think? I don't know. Tweet of the week might be on its way out, or game of the week might be on its way out. We got to do something uniform like every week. We used to do uniform of the week, but there's got to be some sort of, I don't know. I think when you get fired up about uniforms, I think it's some of the best stuff we do, which is great.
Yep.
So we'll get out of here. It's been a time. We covered a lot. This podcast felt about as long as kind of this whole last week has felt with all the Frost, Milton, coaching search, signing day, all that stuff kind of was just thrown into everything. And we were able to cover it all here in about an hour, just a little over an hour, which I'm really proud of us for doing that. So thank you guys so much for being with us. Stay tuned, stick around for Up All Night. Those guys will be on right after us, which will be fun. Until next time, Brian says, Up All Night guys screaming finally. It wasn't that much longer than normal. It was only maybe
9:04, guys. Give us a break. You know what? We're not getting off now. Let's talk more about you.
What do you want to talk about?
I really like the Lance logo decal. That looked good.
Oh, so good. Up All Night at 9:04. So coming up for next, actually. But we will be back next week with episode 248. Until then, you can find us on Twitter at BaileyJAdams22, at by CA Simmons, at Night Sports Now, and at Pegasus Podcast. Thank you guys so much for being with us, and we will talk to you soon.
Bye, everybody.